Joining me now on the Knicks Film School Podcast, a returning guest. He has been kind enough to join us a few times in the past. Surprisingly, he keeps agreeing to come back on, even though every time he's on here, it seems to be about the Knicks trying to poach players from the team he covers. No, in all seriousness, he does an amazing job covering the Jazz for KSL Sports. Jeremiah Jensen, welcome back to the program once again, sir. How are you?
Jonathan, it's great to be on. Knicks Nation, how are you? It's great to see all of you. Yeah, let's do it. I'm sure I know it's coming, and I look forward to it.
Well, okay. Let's ease into it, right? We won't dive into the deep end of the pool.
Fair enough. Yeah. We'll save it for the end.
Yeah, we'll wait into the shallow end. So I actually want to go back to before the season even started, because like from our vantage point here in New York, you know, you hear things and like you hear mostly what national media are saying about all the teams, but a team like the Jazz. And like my sense entering this season was that like the Jazz were kind of on alert before the season even started, as like, listen, coming off of last year's loss against the Clippers, no Kawhi, they better get it right. And it feels like if it's not this season, then there's going to be big changes. Were you guys feeling the same way there locally?
Very much so. Yeah. The expectations were as high for this team as they've been since the Stockton and Malone days. Wow. When they went to the finals. Because if you remember last year, Jonathan, this team had the best record in the NBA in the regular season.
Yep.
So naturally you're thinking, okay, this team, they slipped up in the playoffs, but Donovan wasn't 100%. Mike Conley was hurt. They realized they have a weakness in their roster. They can address it. They go out and get Rudy Gay. I think that can help. So here we go. Let's roll it back. And this team's going to make another run. Well, it didn't go very well. I mean, this team was number one defensive rating last year, and their defense was abysmal this year. Joe Ingles was not the same player he was, and eventually got injured, lost for the season. They trade him to save some money. Rudy Gay didn't work out. So yeah, there were so many expectations for this team coming into the season, and I don't think they were unfair, because you're looking at a team that had the best record last year.
Sure.
With Donovan coming back, Rudy coming back, this team there's some older parts, Boyan and Jordan Clarkson, Mike Conley in their 30s, Joe Ingles, but they still had a lot of expectations and reason to think that Donovan and Rudy were going to take a jump again, and this team was going to be a contender, and it just didn't work out.
So as we're going through the season, you know, especially the early part of the year, you know, you look up at the net ratings, which a lot of people go by as the true indicator of how good teams are. And like, there were the Jazz neck and neck with the Warriors in the beginning part of the season, outscored, like the margin was that of a contending team. And then you check in with the results, and it was like, oh, that was odd. The Jazz, you know, blew a 15-point fourth quarter lead or something. And then you'd start to see these things happening. And then again, just from our vantage point, it felt like the noise was ratcheting up. Did the pressure kind of like incrementally increase as the season was going on? Like, what was the sense of like what it was like to cover this team during the year?
Yeah, there's no question. I think the team probably felt some pressure. It really started in January. I believe January 5th, this team was 28-10. They were a game or a game and a half back of the Warriors, who at that time had the best record in the NBA. And then after that, they had a losing record the rest of the way. So something happened in January. They had a lot of COVID issues they were dealing with. Donovan Mitchell had a concussion, players in and out of the lineup. I think Joe Ingles was not playing his best. He was feeling the pressure of the trade deadline coming. He knew what was coming if he wasn't performing well. And so you add all those details into that. And I think the team just had some fissures and some cracks that they didn't have in the past. And then as the team loses, then all of a sudden some passive aggressiveness starts happening. Rudy takes these subtle shots at Donovan Mitchell's defense, you know, talking about how improved Devin Booker was. And then it was going back and forth a little bit in the media. And you know, Quin tried to put some of those fires out, but they happened, and it just, you know, there was some of that going on. And then in that process, this team forgot who they were. They got away from the way they were playing team basketball, moving the basketball, and it became iso ball and hero ball. Donovan Mitchell was taking too much on himself to take this team and carry them. And they needed to play the way they had normally played, and they weren't. And so this team was not fun to watch this year because they stopped playing Jazz basketball. They stopped playing the way that they did that got them to where they have been in the last 3 or 4 years.
I could have taken the last 20 seconds of what you said and applied it directly to the Knicks of the last 2 years, because the Knicks, I mean, look, we haven't had nearly as much success as you guys over the last 20 years, but we were actually a fun team to watch in our own sense.
Last year was fun. Everyone's thinking, John, I mean, sorry to just chime in, but from my perspective, like, okay, the Knicks, they've hired the right people in the front office. They've got the right people around them. They're making good draft decisions, and they've got some young talent. And Julius Randle was playing like an all-star, and it felt like, okay, the Knicks got something here, right? And then, like, I think you're pointing in the same direction that the Jazz went here. Something was off, and it just fell apart, and they could never bounce back from it. The Jazz made the playoffs, but it felt like they shouldn't have been, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And I guess to be honest with you, I'm still kind of trying to wade my way through where to point the finger of blame. And look, this is New York. We got to blame someone. Like, if we're not blaming someone, you're not doing it right. A lot of it went on Tibbs, a lot of it went on and still is on Randall. Does that happen in Utah? And if so, was there one finger pointed in one direction, or was it in multiple directions?
Look, Jonathan, we don't have the Yankees, and we don't have the Nets, and we don't have the Jets and the Giants and all these other teams that we can turn our attention to when the Jazz aren't doing well. The Jazz are the big show here in town, and college football is huge here too. But Jazz brings it all together. Everybody loves the Utah Jazz here, and so when this team isn't performing well, then people here get frustrated. And people here are really intelligent basketball fans. Everybody here plays basketball, and so you can't fool people here. So when things aren't when you're not playing the game right, and you're not doing things the right way, and you're not hustling, and you're not doing the things that fans expect the bare minimum of you to do, they're going to notice, and they're going to be upset about it. And for the first time in a while, since maybe Ty Corbin was the head coach here, Jonathan, there's a little bit of apathy in Jazz Nation, which is weird.
Okay.
Very much so, where it got to the point where the frustration, they had 15 blown leads this year in the fourth quarter. It was just so frustrating. It was
you guys and us. We lapped the field when it came to blowing leads in the second half games. Yeah.
And fans, it was like, oh, here we go again. And it happens over and over again, that you go from the pain, you go through the 5 stages of grief, right? And finally, Jazz fans.
There's only 5? I thought there were.
There could be more. We could invent a few, I'm sure. But Jazz fans reached the point of acceptance. It's like, this is who we are now. And they're like, So the Jazz are entering a really interesting offseason where they've got a little bit of fan apathy and frustration. They realize they can't run this back. And so what is this organization going to do after what they saw this year? How are they going to fix this roster and move forward? Do they move forward with Donovan and Rudy? Do they move one of them? How does this all work? So while the Jazz season was really, really lame and boring and dull, the offseason is going to be really fascinating. I think it's not just for Jazz fans here or people that follow the team, but around the NBA, I think a lot of people are going to be wondering, what are the Jazz going to do this offseason?
Well, and look, I want to be very clear about this. It is not fair for the quote unquote small market team. And I don't know if Salt Lake City is small. It's not a small market, but when you compare it to a Miami or in LA or whatever, that's the bucket it gets put in.
We don't have the beach here. I get it.
Yeah. There's sand, not that far away, but no, it's
not a lot of clubs on the corner to go to, if you know what I mean.
There's no
churches, no clubs.
There's not one just out of sight.
There's churches, no clubs. Sorry.
No, there you go. It's not fair that those are the teams, and especially if one of those teams has a really good player, young player, especially like a Donovan Mitchell, the spotlight's always going to be on there and be like, okay, when's that guy going to ask out? Where's it going to go? Yeah. But that's the reality of the NBA because of things that have happened over the last 10, 15 years. Which brings us to here. And like you said, I think it is probably the talk of the NBA. Before we get to Donovan, you mentioned Quin Snyder a few times. We're recording this at 5:11 Eastern Standard Time on May 24th. Quin Snyder is still the Jazz coach, and I think that is a surprising development to some people who expected that maybe that wasn't going to be the case. Is there any expectation that it seems like he's just going to be back, right?
Yeah, we have to assume that he refused to talk about his contract situation. I guess you can call it locker clean out, his last interview of the season. And he left it at that. He didn't really elaborate any further on his situation. Now he's under contract for one more year. GM Justin Zanuck has made it clear that they want Quin to be their head coach moving forward.
Okay.
So the Jazz want him to be the head coach. There's no way he's getting fired. The question is, does Quin want to extend? Does he want to coach beyond this year? And he has not answered that question publicly. And we have no idea what he said to other people in the organization. So that's where it stands right now. There is this kind of weird feeling like, okay, Quin's a lame duck coach going into this last season. What does he want? What is he looking at? And all season long next year, now this is going to be a distraction if it's not resolved one way or the other. Either he needs to sign an extension or they need to move forward with some other coach, because you can't really go into a whole year where every day you're going to be wondering, okay, is Quin going to be the coach next year? Or how much longer is this going to go? So that needs to be addressed in some way publicly, but it's not being addressed. So yes, as of right now, Quin is under contract. He's the head coach, but there's still so much uncertainty and so many unanswered questions about his future here with Utah.
Well, I'm going to ask one of those unanswered questions right now. The first of what might be a few unfair questions to you. Do we know if Donovan Mitchell wants Quin Snyder to be the Jazz head coach? And by extension, how much do the Jazz care about that? I think I know the answer to the second question, but I don't know the first.
Well, I'll answer both of them. Number one, Donovan did mention that in his last interview after they lost the Mavericks in Game 6. He wants Quin. He loves Quin. He wants Quin to be the coach. There's no question. And I'm telling you, from anybody that I've talked to, there's never been any feeling that there's any friction between the two. The relationship is solid. It's great. Quin and Donovan have always had a connection since he was drafted. So I don't see that as a problem.
Okay.
So that's not something I think that there needs to be any worry about. Your second question, was about.
Well, I think that kind of answers the second one, which is like, do the Jazz care about who Donovan wants as the head coach?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you this, and this maybe bridges into the next question you asked me, but the Jazz are doing everything they can to keep Donovan happy. And I can tell you that moving forward, they want Donovan to be the face of this franchise. There's no question about that. Remember, the Jazz have the All-Star game coming here in February.
Yep.
It would not be a good look for the Jazz to not have any All-Stars in that game. And it would be weird to not have Donovan be the face and the host of that All-Star game. This is a big year for this organization. This means a lot to them. This is the 30th anniversary of the first time they hosted the All-Star game. So this is a big thing for the Utah Jazz and for this community. And so, and that'll kind of build into what you're going to be asking me about with Donovan is, yes, Donovan, I mean, they absolutely. The answer is yes.
It's funny that you bring that up unprompted, because I was going to ask about it, because again, one of those things, we're not in Utah. We only hear a lot of what the national media says about this. And the All-Star game thing has been brought up as like, correct or right or wrong, it seems to be part of the calculus. If there is a calculus to be going on, which again, I'm getting ahead of myself, because maybe there is no calculus for the Jazz right now. Maybe it's just like, I mean, Donovan Mitchell has a lot of years left on his contract. There's no reason he should be going anywhere. But again, you hear the talk. The other relationship I want to ask about, and it's been well documented, is the relationship between Donovan and Rudy. I feel like we haven't heard anything since the end of the year from your. I mean, you're plugged in. From your impression, where are those two guys at right now with each other?
It's been a guessing game, honestly. This all started, back. I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but when they both got COVID and it kind of set off everything. We all know the history behind that. Donovan was there friction building between the two before that? I have no idea. We don't know, but it never became public, or nobody ever knew that the two of them had some issues until that moment. And then they went in the bubble, and apparently there was a meeting between the two, and everything was ironed out and fine. And they had a great playoff series against the Nuggets. It came up one basket short of winning that series, and we just kind of moved. Everybody moved on. And then last year was great. They had the best record in the regular season, and then the Clippers series happened, and Rudy was embarrassed.
Really?
By his teammates. If you've watched the Jazz, you know that Rudy is, 3-time Defensive Player of the Year. Everybody else around him are a bunch of chairs, and nobody can guard on the perimeter. And Rudy's got to fit. It's basically 5-on-1 sometimes.
Yeah.
And in that series, especially with the Clippers' length and all the problems they presented, when you have hobbled Donovan Mitchell and Mike Conley, who has one hamstring, trying to guard 6'6" and 6'9" guys. I mean, it was a disaster. That's why they blew that 25-point lead in Game 6. And I think that there was some frustration Rudy has carried since that moment. He hasn't spoken a lot publicly about it, but that was a pride moment for him where he got blamed for their playoff failure, and it was not his fault.
And he caught a lot of blame, I felt like, nationally from people who maybe were not as keyed in on what actually was happening in that series.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you're the defensive player of the year and your team blew a 25-point lead, it's on you, right?
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, so that kind of gets us to now. And there was some passive aggressiveness throughout the season, and there's kept being these reports bubbling up out of somewhere that they were having some issues. And the Booker thing was kind of the tipping point. And so here we are again this year. Whatever that was, it hasn't gone away, and there's friction again. Apparently, they talked again, and everybody had a meeting. There was a meeting between the players, and they got a lot of stuff off their chest. It was a team thing. It wasn't just the two of them. And so they moved on forward, but obviously things didn't end well this season. And so then there was a report a couple weeks ago from somebody I know, Sean O'Connell, who said that Rudy wants to give this team an ultimatum that either it's me or him. And Rudy denies it. Okay. Rudy denied it publicly, said on Twitter, this is just another rumor.
Okay.
But why does this stuff keep happening with these two? Why does this keep coming up? It's and to what degree is it serious or is it overblown? I tend to be in the camp that it's a little bit overblown. I mean, I saw these two interacting during the playoff series I was covering in Dallas, and everything seemed cool. They were high-fiving and everything was fine. But again, I'm not in the locker room. I'm not with these guys every moment. So I don't know. And I haven't had any conversations with anybody because the season's over and everybody's gone. So that's where we stand right now is I don't know where their relationship is. And I don't know if that report is true. And I don't know if that's happened yet. But the fact that we're having to talk about this still 2 years after all this stuff happened.
Yeah.
It's a problem for this franchise. And this franchise has to get these guys in the room and say, okay, can we move forward with you together? And if we can't, let's do something about it.
Well, goodness knows, I don't know Donovan Mitchell, and I don't know who really knows him well, but I don't know. He doesn't strike me as the sort of guy that would march into a GM's office and be like, it's me or him, or like trade.
No.
Like you said it a few times, it's passive aggressiveness. Like there's like, it's subtle. Just one other thing I'm curious about. Like, I know in some NBA cities there is, if there's a sense that an organization is catering so heavily to a player, there can be a little pushback against that. Like, well, wait a minute, who is this guy to get that sort of? Is there any of that in Utah, or are Jazz fans like, we got to keep Donovan here no matter what?
This situation, I think, can split the fan base, right? It's okay. So which player, if we're trading one of them, who are we trading? Well, don't trade Donovan. Well, don't trade Rudy. That kind of stuff naturally can occur. But, to that point, I mean, these guys, there's obviously, I don't know, they're both really good guys. And it's frustrating that they can't figure out how to make this all work. And maybe it's not just a personality. Maybe it's just on the court stuff too. Like it's just not a match. But yeah, I think it absolutely could splinter the fan base, and it can cause people to say, okay, well, I'm Team Donovan or I'm Team Rudy. We haven't seen that really developed yet because we don't know that ultimatum has actually been given, but there's still already some of that going on with fans knowing that obviously something's going to change this up. That's going to be, we don't know, but it could be big. And if it's big, it means probably one of those two is moving on. So I think that's somewhat developing, but not quite to the point where it's a thing, if that makes sense.
Is there a sense that an era has ended? Like, is there it doesn't sound from what you're saying that there is an acceptance yet that next season's version is going to be drastically different. But that, again, from the outside, just how this is being covered nationally, you would think that it's like, that's already a done deal, that this is like, these guys are not going to both be back next year. Is that the sense you guys are getting?
Well, no, I won't go that far yet, because I think there's still time to figure out, can they get these guys on the same page? And then once they do, then I think there does need to be a reset with this franchise, if that makes sense. Now, they could push that button. They could move one or the other. If it's to that point, I'm not in the room with Danny Ainge and Justin Zanuck and Quin Snyder and the ownership. And I mean, I don't know if Dwayne Wade will be there or who, but they've got, I mean, Dwayne should be there. I think he would help, but they've got to get all these guys in a room and say, okay, the future of the franchise is at stake here. You guys' pursuit of a championship is at stake here. Let's figure this out. And if one of you, if we don't feel like this can work forward, let's make a decision. But if the decision is to stick with those guys, which I think is the right decision because you've got 2 all-stars. How many teams, Jonathan, have 2 all-stars?
Well, the Knicks
2 of the top 30 players, right? So
it's hard. It's hard to get to.
Why would you want to blow it up if you can fix it? So if it can't be fixed, then you have to. But if you can, you got to try to fix it first. My belief, and I don't have any intel on this, is they'll do everything they can to keep these guys together. If they had to pick and choose, they would keep Donovan.
Okay.
I'm telling you right now, that would be what they do. I think that then that would come from ownership. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point, but they have to make massive changes to the roster around Donovan and Rudy to get a new identity and a new look moving forward that can be more competitive and better defensively in the way that the NBA plays nowadays. So I think that's kind of where things are at with that.
We don't have to go through fake Rudy Gobert trades. I'm sure you've been through that enough. It's I'll say this. I think it's an interesting conversation. And if and when it comes to that, I'll be curious to see what the marketplace is like.
Well, real quick, if they do, they don't have draft picks. They have no assets.
I know.
So if the Jazz are going to do a radical rework of the roster, say it's around Donovan, then Rudy is the $40 million a year that they have to do it with. So in that sense, if they have to do something like that, they have to move one of them because they take up so much of the salary cap. So I think that is important to mention that if they do make something big, they may have to sacrifice one of these guys. Oh, absolutely. And
we don't have to go back too much down memory lane, but like looking back at the Conley deal, like that was a big play. Not that you gave up a ton to get him, but it was some assets out the door, which meant it was assets that you couldn't then reserve for, a later point in time. So it's interesting what they'll be able to do.
Memphis has their first round pick right now. Grayson Allen and Jay Crowder were playing in the playoffs when Mike Conley wasn't. So Mike Conley's been incredible in the regular season. It just hasn't worked out in the playoffs for him. So that's I'm sure Knicks fans aren't concerned about Mike Conley, but how has that worked out for the Jazz? Well, it hasn't, and that's kind of the part of the deal with what they've got to do moving forward. They got to decide whether Mike Conley's the piece they move.
So we'll end on Donovan. So I know he was in New York. I think he took in, if I recall, a Ranger game. And obviously there's the connection with the Mets because of his dad. He made the rounds. Look, we talked 2 years ago and this noise was there then. It's going to be there until he either retires as a member of the Jazz or he plays in a different place and then the noise will move with him. Do you, I'll just come out and ask you, do you get, from your vantage point, do you get a sense that Donovan Mitchell is looking to play in a bigger market at some point?
Donovan is such a nice guy. I cannot say enough good things about him that I think he's being very careful about this. I don't know if he knows what he wants, but you're hearing all these rumblings and these things. So, where there's smoke, there's fire. Is there something to this? Who's starting these things? Is it the Knicks? Is it the people around Donovan?
I tell you if I knew.
Yeah, I'm sure that his mom would love him to come back to New York. I don't fault her for that. It would be a lot easier to just drive to the games instead of flying to Salt Lake. So are there people in his camp that want him to come back to New York? He's a Westchester kid, right? Yep. So yeah, it's like if somebody from Salt Lake City was one of the top 10 basketball players in the world, Jazz fans would want him to come back here. So, Kyle Kuzma played college basketball here. Jazz fans want Kyle Kuzma to come back here. You know what I mean? Yeah. I get it. And Donovan is a special player and he's a special person. So I get why Knicks fans would want him. And I see why some people in his camp might want him back. Right now, he's got a contract. He's under contract for 3 more years with the player option for a 4th. And it's a lucrative contract. And while he's under contract, I don't think the Jazz have any intention of moving him or trading him. So would he ask for a trade? We talked about it earlier. Donovan's such a nice guy. This is not James Harden we're talking about here. He is the complete opposite of that. So this is not a guy that's going to try to manipulate and get what he wants all the time. This is a guy that I think has a lot of loyalty to the Utah Jazz organization, They aggressively pursued him and went after him when nobody else thought he could become what he is. They gave him the opportunity to do this. So I think that does play with Donovan, but I also get the other pull. So I'm not going to sit here and be naive and ignorant and think that that's not happening. Naturally, that's going to happen. So it's up to the Jazz to build a contender and build a team that Donovan wants to play for. I think ultimately, this is what it comes down to, Jonathan, is Donovan wants to win, and he wants to win a championship, and he wants to be the best player he can be. And he'll go wherever he needs to make that happen. And if he doesn't feel it's in Utah at the end of his contract, he'll move on. And if it gets even worse than that before the 3 years is up, maybe it's this year and he doesn't like the direction. Maybe he will go to management and say, I'd like a change of scenery. So I'm not naive to think that can't happen. And I think when we talked a year or two ago, I told you that there's no way he's leaving. There's no way there's no way the Knicks are going to get him. Well, that's different now. And Donovan's coming off a year where he didn't go up in trajectory. He leveled out this year, and he had some serious problems in the clutch, and he's got a lot of problems in his game that he's got to iron out to get to the next level. He's got to be better in the clutch. I think he's got, he tried to take over games too much. He tried ISO ball too much. He got out of what made the Jazz great. So there are some things that he's got to work on and get better. And I don't want to call this year a step back, but it was definitely not a step forward for him as far as his performance on the court. And so he's got a lot of growth to do on his own game, and he's still young, 25 years old. So,
I think the criticism, and I've been pretty vocal about this, I think the criticism of Donovan and his game has gone a little bit too far. Like, he was neck and neck with Trae Young for my last, I think, All NBA guard spot. And I think I flip flopped like towards the end. I think I ended up going with Young at the last minute. But that's no reflection on Donovan. Was because of, honestly, I think there was just like too many guards. But I thought he was one of the best 15 players in the NBA this season. And I like you think that he could get, even better. And like you said, he's still young. Last thing I want to ask you, just again, because we don't really have a sense of this stuff from so far away. The ownership change happened now, what was it, 2 years ago to Ryan Smith? Yep. Dwayne Wade's there, obviously Danny Ainge. My impression of the Jazz for a very, very long time is that when you talk about culture in the NBA, like maybe they were a little quieter about it, not like heat culture where they're like, you talk about the clubs where they're like blaring it from the loudspeakers. Yeah. But I respected Jazz culture from afar. You never know how if it's going to change and how it's going to change if there's a change in ownership. Certainly happened here a little bit. You might say 20 some odd years ago. We won't go there right now though. Anyway, how is there a sense that it's still sturdy or has there been a change of any kind? And if so, what?
Well, yeah, there definitely has been a change. And I think that we're still trying to figure out what the change means. Okay. In the past, the Miller family owned this team for almost 3 decades. And there was just you're right. There was stability there. They knew who they were. There was an identity. This is who we are. This is how we're going to always be. Well, a new owner comes in who's this billionaire tech guy who skateboards and he plays
backwards
basketball and he's got the hat thing going on. You know what I mean? Like he's my age. Like you're not used to owners being your age, and he's my age, and he doesn't wear a suit on. It's just he's just got a different vibe, and he's hanging out with Dwayne Wade, and Dwayne Wade now owns part of the team. It's different, and so it is different. I think everyone's trying to adjust to it, and even Rudy and Quin were part of the old guard, right? So they're adjusting to it. Danny Ainge, you throw Danny Ainge into the mix, and we still don't know what Danny Ainge is actually doing, but he's there.
He's just there. He's just hanging out.
You closely followed the Celtics because of the rivalry with the Knicks and all that kind of stuff. You know what Danny Ainge did in Boston, and he was a shrewd move maker. So
he was.
Are they going to be making a lot of moves here? So there's a lot of uncertainty with the organization, right? I guess the point I'm getting to is there is a lot of feeling out right now, and the Jazz are trying to figure out what their identity is now as they're moving forward with a new owner, with somebody like Dwayne Wade in tow, and Danny Ainge. What impact is he going to have on this franchise? So there is a lot of I don't knows about this franchise right now, and so there could be change when there's I don't knows. We don't know yet. We'll find out this offseason. That kind of sets the stage for everything, but. Yeah, this is not the old Jazz that you remember watching when the Miller family and everything was always the same and you just knew what the Jazz were and were going to be. I think there is a sense of some newness here, but also some uncertainty. Not that the franchise is unstable or anything like that, but that what is the identity of this franchise moving forward? And I think the All-Star game here next year is all part of that, is kind of setting the tone for this franchise moving forward in the NBA. It's all part of that. But it's going to be exciting here to figure out what that is. But to answer your question, it is different. And so that could impact how things are done here moving forward as far as personnel goes.
Well, like you said, it's a situation that everybody's watching. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't going to be monitoring it pretty closely from afar.
Hey, no Donovan Knicks trade machine here. You got any ideas of what the Knicks would need to try to pry Donovan out of here? I'm sure. I mean, Knicks fans can send it my way on Twitter, and I'll tell you what I think.
To be honest with you, we did a podcast about it a few weeks because, I mean, look, the Knicks don't have a star. And they're not. I mean, we like RJ Barrett a lot. I like RJ Barrett a lot. Some people like him a lot, even more than me. Maybe he becomes a real true star one day. I don't think he's quite there yet. He needs to grow a few parts of his game. Randall, we don't need to talk about the regression that Randall took this year. It's like you're not doing anything in the NBA if you don't have a star. So if you're the Knicks and you want to get better, you look for where can we get one of those guys? And Donovan Mitchell, listen, say what you want about whatever faults he has. That dude is a star with a capital S. So
no question, on and off the court, mind you, he is special on and off the court.
Yeah. So I personally don't think they're in a great position to trade for him right now because I mean, if I was the Jazz, would I feel great about like RJ Barrett he's the main return for Mitchell?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I'd ask for Barrett and 3 future first round picks. I don't know what that would do, but yeah, I don't know. We can have that conversation if and when the time comes. Before I let you go, just to let the folks at home know where they could find you. If anyone's not following you, where they could follow you, the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm active on Twitter at JJ Sportsbeat. And, if there's people there wanting to follow Donovan Mitchell every step that he takes, we've got you covered, KSLSports.com. So check in with the Jazz, check in with Donovan Mitchell by going to KSLSports.com whenever you're interested. There you go.
KSLSports.com was so invaluable to me when I was doing the research on Walt Perrin, Johnny Bryant, who we haven't even talked about. I think that's the last time you were on, is we were talking about Johnny Bryant.
Yeah, Walt's my guy too. If Walt's watching, Walt, what's up, man? we miss you in Salt Lake, but you got 2 great people there. The Knicks stole from Salt Lake City, and I'm glad that they're doing well there and thriving. But good people and really good at their jobs. So you're fortunate to have them, Knicks Nation.
Well, let me tell you, there's a lot of members of Knicks Nation who want Johnny Bryant to get a promotion.
Hey,
I'll just
he'll
say
be ready. Hey, I'm just saying, if Quin Snyder moves on, Johnny Bryant's going to be on a short list of replacements. I promise you that.
That's okay. Interesting. That's well. I think they what do they call that in the business? A teaser, a hanger for whatever.
Yeah.
For the next
you
episode.
You may need to have me on again in 6 months to a year, Jonathan.
We won't wait as long next time. We'll probably have something to talk about sooner than that. Jeremiah Jensen, KSL Sports. You are the best. Thank you again so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, man.
You got it. Thanks, Jonathan, for having me.